Major League Baseball fans have had varying opinions over the years of what it takes to be the most proficient hitter on the field. Is it the guy who constantly gets hits and hits over 300 every year? Is it the guy who hits more home runs than he gets singles? Or is it the guy who can keep getting on base for his team? Sometimes you'll get the best parts of all of these in one, but at this point, it's an unsolvable argument that will never have a consensus. Does getting walked a lot automatically mean proficient hitting? You're not technically hitting anything, but you'd think you'd have to be a menacing presence in the box to get walked, because otherwise, you wouldn't really be getting walked. But you also have to be disciplined yourself. It's not just making the pitcher pitch outside the zone, it's recognizing what is and isn't a strike. In baseball, having an understanding of the strike zone is an art. It's something I've always admired, and guys on the field don't get to see the big zone like we do on TV. And some might think walking is boring. That's fine, that's totally understandable. It's the same thing every time, there are no variables, and a guy just walks to first. But to me, that's if you're just looking at the outcome of the scenario. Seeing a guy trying to paint the corners with another guy who is able to recognize pitches that are a quarter of an inch too far away is the kind of stuff that makes me love baseball. It's the duel between a pitcher and a hitter. I'd rather see a guy who is selective and pounces on mistakes than a guy who's free swinging all the time or a guy who just swings at nothing. And that's what Juan Soto does best. That's his game. Don't get me wrong, his bat-to-ball skills are fantastic too, but the man gets his reputation from his elite plate discipline. He wants to walk because the pitcher should feel bad for not giving him anything to hit. Today, I want to dive into the currently short but eventful career thus far of Juan Soto and why he just gets on base like nobody else does. Before I get too deep into niche Soto on-base statistics, we have to know how Soto got where he is now, where he's at the point where he can turn down a $350 million MLB contract, and then not too long after, turn down a $440 million contract, a contract that would have lasted 15 years, basically his entire career. I'll get more into Soto's contract situation later though. So, to start from the beginning of his career, Soto signed with the Washington Nationals in 2015 when he was only 16 years old. In case you aren't fully familiar with the MLB prospect process and why Soto can sign at such a young age, this is because international players do not have to go through the MLB draft. International prospects have their own individual signing period, which is kind of how things used to be for all players before we had the first MLB draft in 1965. Nowadays, with the MLB draft, it has its own rules about which players can and can't be eligible, and those who are eligible have to go through the draft. There are a lot of other criteria to have eligibility for the MLB draft, but we want to focus on just a few of them. Those being, 1. A player needs to be a resident of or have attended an educational institution in the US, Canada, or any US territory. 2. Any high school player who fits that criteria can only enter the draft after their graduation. And finally, 3. If someone chooses to attend a university, college players need to finish their junior year or turn 21. We obviously don't need to go very in-depth with this because Soto was born and grew up in Santo Domingo, which is a city in the Dominican Republic, not part of US territory. Therefore, Soto was eligible to be signed at 16 while most of the guys were coming out of college or high school. Soto was quickly widely considered to be one of the league's best going into 2020, 2021, and 2022. His highest ranking was 4th for MLB Network's 2022 preseason top 100. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say this is a super special case for Soto. Plenty of other international players like Acuna, Tatis, Guerrero were all signed at young ages. But it's a special case in comparison to baseball as a whole, and I think that's significant. It's a league that is mostly comprised of players in the United States, not to mention adding in US territories and Canada. At a minimum, a large majority of these guys have to at least wait until the draft, likely at age 18. With many of those guys opting to attend college, it leaves them out of the MLB picture until they are at least 21. Not to mention, you'd think a young kid would falter at such a young age, but Soto did not. In his first minor league season at age 17, in rookie and low A ball, Soto slashed .368, .420, .553 for an OPS of .973 in 53 games. Then, the next year he slashed .351, .415, .505 for an OPS of .919 in 32 games. Soto sustained an ankle injury during his second year, and that caused him to miss a solid chunk of games though. Honestly, looking at this compared to his full major league career thus far, it might be the longest he's been out for an injury during the season, which is kind of wild. He's not had to miss many games since he signed, which I think is something to take note of. We've seen time and time again players so talented sustaining injuries that are just the absolute worst. So longevity is important. In his final year in the minor leagues, Soto slashed 362, 462, 757 for a 1218 OPS. Unsurprisingly, a guy who was signed to his first MLB contract at age 16 turned out to perform even better as he got older. But it's ridiculous how good he was through the entire minor league stint. Now in AA at 19 years old, Soto was being called up while most other aspiring MLB athletes that age were just in high school not that long ago. Not to mention, Soto barely played in AA and just completely skipped AAA. A large majority of Soto's games were in the varying levels of Single A, with a whopping 8 games played in AA before being called up. I mean, it wasn't really a risk for his development because the Nationals had a ridiculous amount of outfield injuries at the time, and they could always send him back down. But there was also the chance he just kept raking, which is exactly what happened. In that time before Soto was called up in 2018, he didn't actually have as ridiculous of a walk rate as you might think. He had an 11.3% walk rate in his entire minor league career of 122 games played. An 11.3% walk rate is very good, but was not really near the top of the minor leagues from 2016 to 2018. For comparison, the lowest walk rate that Soto had in a season of his major league career was 16%, which was his rookie year. But Soto had been praised for his plate discipline in the minors. So what explains the lower than his standards walk rate and how he was able to raise it so high so easily? I think his low walk rate is likely because he was just getting more swing-worthy pitches. He had the 6th highest batting average in the minors in that span with 362. So he just didn't need to walk and was given a high amount of pitches to hit. This MLB.com article profiling Soto when he was called up in 2018 helps explain this a little bit. Soto said the biggest difference between each level of the minors was the number of off-speed pitches he saw, with pitchers increasingly trying to tempt him to chase pitches out of the zone. That is one area that the Nationals want him to be aware of, trying only to swing at pitches in his strike zone as much as possible. Considering that we know Soto barely spent any time in the higher ranks of the minors, his high amount of hits in the lower levels makes sense given this context. Soto does not mind walking, but if they're throwing him stuff in the zone, he's going to attack it. MLB analysts also knew that despite the walk rate not quite showing yet, his pitch selection and plate discipline would be an incredibly important thing when transferring to the big leagues. On May 20th, 2018, after he continued to absolutely torch minor league pitching, Soto was brought up to the majors the day after Howie Kendrick's season ended with a torn Achilles. Soto got off to an incredibly hot start instantly, and it was like this guy was just too good to even need a period of time to adjust. So far, he has adjusted instantly at each step of his development process. Based on how he started in the majors, AAA likely would have just yielded the same ridiculous results we've been seeing so far. Soto's first hit and first home run came very early in his second ever game played, and the first game he actually started. Also, just for fun, let's take a look at this Nationals team for Soto's first career game. What a wildly different time this was, and it wasn't even that long ago. Trey Turner and Bryce Harper are on the Phillies now and will likely be known forever as Phillies, even though Bryce probably already is for a lot of people. Strasburg was the starter for this game, and his career has been tragically devastated by injury, and Rendon was a legitimate top-of-the-league third baseman at this time, and his career has gone so south so fast with tons of injuries and bad performances. Right now, parts of this lineup are guaranteed a lot of money, with Soto likely joining them with a big contract of his own soon. Anyways, Soto finished his rookie season with 116 games played, only missed one game after he came up, and slashed 292, 406, 517 with a 923 OPS and a 142 OPS plus, 22 home runs, and a 16% walk rate. For those unfamiliar or unsure about OPS plus, it is essentially taking OPS and making it factor in ballparks and the rest of the league as a whole, because there's a lot of differences there. It's simple because a 100 OPS plus represents the league average. So any number above or below that is above or below league average hitting. So in that case, Soto's 142 OPS plus means that he was 42% better than the league average hitter. Soto also ended up second in Rookie of the Year voting, as this was Acuna's rookie year as well, and he ended up winning the award. Besides being in the 98th percentile of walk rates, what else can really show how good Soto is with this plate discipline thus far? Well, Soto wasn't a qualified hitter in 2018, because he wasn't called up till late May, but for players in the MLB with at least 180 plate appearances that year, Soto ranked 27th in the league with a 21.9% outside the zone swing rate. Outside the zone swing rate is basically just how often you are swinging at pitches outside the zone. Obviously, swinging at pitches outside the zone likely won't yield good results, so being 27th in the league in your first year is a very good place to start. And overall, this is an extremely good way to start your career. Soto's sophomore season was really more of the same, but with a full season this time. He had the same OPS plus, a very similar slash line, and his walk rate didn't really change either. He actually had the same exact K rate too, with 20%. The K rate is nothing crazy, but it was above league average. I would say this is probably Soto's most successful year of his career, despite it not really being his greatest individual season. I say that because the Nationals of course made a huge World Series run and won it all, and Soto became a 21-year-old World Series champion, which has only happened so many times, especially for guys who were regular starters. I think Soto's second year is also an important time for me to highlight the Soto Shuffle. Probably Soto's most well-known, thing he does. The reason I'm bringing it up now is because the Nationals playoff run was probably the time when most casual baseball fans were first given a look at who Juan Soto is. The Soto Shuffle is this thing where Soto will take a pitch and just start moving around the box to mess with the pitcher. It varies from time to time too. He might stare at the pitcher and creep forward, he might wiggle his hips around, he might step a foot outside the box and punch the side of his leg. He used to do a nut grab too from time to time, but he stopped that, I think to keep things PG. Now regarding the Soto Shuffle, I can understand finding it obnoxious, but I just love this stuff and I think it's so unique. He's made this thing into his brand. I mean, he's got a chain of himself shuffling, and he's got this website with merch that he should probably consider updating because it says Let's Go Nationals on it. I actually kind of wanted to buy one of these hoodies for this video, but honestly, the bit was not funny enough for a $60 purchase. Anyway, my favorite part is when Soto does the shuffle on a pitch that is just barely off the plate. You'd think he'd only do it on pitches far outside the zone, but the sheer confidence he has in his own strike zone is seriously insane. Bringing this onto the national broadcast for the playoffs was just even better. Since Soto started off his career at such a high level already, 2020 and 2021 are what people truly consider to be Soto's breakout seasons. And this is also where he really started to lower his K rate and raise his walk rate even higher. Soto was already extremely proficient at getting on base, and even in the shortened 2020 season, these numbers are just completely absurd. Soto slashed 351, 490, 695, for an OPS of 1,185 and an OPS plus of 217. Also, despite missing 13 games of the 2020 season, Soto had the most intentional walks in the league with 12. This is also the first season where Soto walked more than he struck out, with a 20.9% walk rate and a 14.3% K rate. Both huge leaps from where they were at last year. Honestly, Soto fans were truly robbed this year of multiple things. First of all, 13 games is unfortunately far too many to miss in the shortened 60-game season, so Soto didn't really have a chance to win the MVP despite his ridiculous numbers. Second, are these slash lines sustainable? Absolutely not. Because even if his underlying metrics support these insane numbers, it's just not likely that he would have kept this up for the whole year. But we'll never get to know that because COVID shortened the entire year. The 13 games that Soto missed were also because of COVID, with him getting coronavirus right before the season opener. That also robbed him of a potential MVP. 2021 might be Soto's best overall individual performance, but he actually didn't start off the season that hot, and even had to miss a little bit of time in April with a left shoulder injury. So by the end of May, Soto was slashing 270, 395, 387 for an OPS of 782. Everything was taking a bit of a step back, but the slugging is what was really jarring to see, as he had only 8 extra base hits up until that point. But from June on, Soto was just unbelievable. For the rest of the season, Soto slashed 329, 489, 589, for a 1,078 OPS. An on-base percentage of nearly 500 for that much time is ridiculous. Overall, in the 151 games, Soto slashed 313, 465, 534 for an OPS just under 1,000 and an OPS plus of 175. He unsurprisingly led the league in walks, on-base percentage, and intentional walks as well. Soto's 2021 season was the closest he got to winning the MVP, and while his slash lines aren't technically an improvement over 2020, it's obviously still impressive to see him perform so well in a full season. I don't know if I can confidently say that Soto was robbed of the MVP or anything, because Bryce had a fantastic year, but I do think Soto was a bit better. The OPS Plus was extremely close with Bryce leading, but Soto had 10 more games played, and it was also one of the few years where Soto had surprisingly solid defense. So like I said, I don't think it was a robbery or anything, but I leaned towards Soto back then, and I think I still do now. We're going to finish off Soto's career with what many people consider to be the point where he finally regressed. In 2022, Soto had what was widely considered to be the worst offensive year of his career. He slashed 242, 401, 452 for an OPS of 853 and an OPS plus of 147. It was the least home runs he's had in a full season with 27, and it was also career lows for all his slash lines, especially for his average and slugging. It was especially a jarring drop-off for a lot of people after he was seemingly getting better every single year, but people should know that that's not really possible. Soto was traded at the deadline after the Nationals couldn't really get a deal done with him, and trading him meant full committal to a rebuild if that wasn't apparent already. Also, once he was traded, his 52 games with the Padres that year were a pretty bad stretch of his career, and he had just a 778 OPS in those games. Despite a lot of skepticism, Soto still had plenty of high expectations going into the 2023 season. In the end, Soto had a much better season this year, but people were really starting to question things early on. His splits in April were pretty bad, even with his walk rate not suffering all that much. Soto's stats in August were actually much worse in my opinion, as he didn't even look like his normal self with a 322 on base percentage in that month. But since Soto had a fantastic May through July, it got much less attention than his performance in April. However, he ended 2023 on a really strong note, hitting by far his most home runs in a month that year and ending up with a 1,156 OPS in September. By the end of 2023, Soto slashed 275, 410, 519 for a 930 OPS and a 158 OPS plus. His slash lines were a huge improvement over 2022, but he still hadn't been able to recreate what he did in 2021. It was a season much more akin to his first 2 years, and I can't exactly call a 5.5 BWAR and F4 season a bad thing, but we all still expected much more. So, now that we're all caught up on Soto's career, what has it all looked like so far, and why is his game almost unmatched? Since Soto joined the league in 2018, he has had the second lowest swing rate among qualified players with 37%. Essentially, this is just how often he's swinging the bat in general at pitches, leaving him as one of the least aggressive hitters in the league. I've touched on this earlier, but he simply does not want to swing the bat if he does not feel like he can do something with those pitches. Obviously, being a free swinger can lead to pitchers throwing outside the zone more often, while being a passive hitter can lead to pitchers attacking the zone more often. A guy like Daniel Vogelbach, who was the only player with a lower swing rate than Soto in that time, can sometimes do damage with his passiveness, but not consistently enough. Soto's passiveness works for him because he's been consistent at doing damage with good pitches to hit. He's had an OPS plus of at least 140 in each season since he debuted. Since 2018, only one other player has done the same, and that's Aaron Judge. Soto also has the most walks out of any player in history before their age 25 season. The craziest part about it is that's not even close, and he had a shortened season that hurts those numbers too. Soto also currently leads the league in on-base percentage among all active players. Have other guys like Trout and Votto had to play longer? Yeah, but Soto also leads the league in on-base percentage since he debuted as well. Finally, he's one of 2 players currently in the league who has walked more than he's struck out, and he's created a fairly large gap between his walks and strikeouts. Well, there are other guys, but if you look, everyone else has like barely any plate appearances. So I think what Soto has done so far in his career is almost unmatched, both currently and historically. I think he deserves whatever massive contract he gets, and no, I don't think him potentially transitioning to a full-time DH down the road hurts his value that much either. Many think his recent regression means he'll never see an offer like the Nationals' $440 million one again, but I honestly can still see him getting a $400+ million contract even with his recent down years. But I've talked a lot about what Soto does well, basically throughout this entire video. So what are Soto's weaknesses? Well, I mean offensively. His defense and base running as a whole are obviously not great, but offense greatly outweighs base running and defense. I want to talk about his offensive weaknesses for a few reasons. First, I don't want to ignore them because they are there, and I think it would be ignorant to just praise Soto the entire video. Second, I think it's relevant to try to understand why Soto hasn't been able to surpass this monumental standard we all have of him. The biggest issue you may have heard regarding Soto's hitting is his ground ball rate, which has probably been his most consistent problem. Despite Soto's great power, solid contact skills, and elite plate discipline, he's always had a tendency to induce ground balls. In 2023, Soto had the 10th highest ground ball rate in the league with 51%. Don't get me wrong, I don't think this is a very easy thing to just improve upon. You'd assume Soto would have to sacrifice one of his good to elite skills to make up for it. So it's probably not as easy as saying he should just lift the ball more, because it's not that easy. But Soto's ground ball issues were a thing in even his best seasons. So I wouldn't say it's the sole thing responsible here, although reducing it would certainly help. I think Soto's issues recently might have something to do with how often he's pulling the ball. If we consider Soto's 2020 and 2021 seasons as his two outliers, we could see that in those seasons, he was pulling the ball much less than he is now. Soto has been praised for his incredible ability to go the other way, with one of the biggest examples coming in the World Series. In Game 6 against Justin Verlander, Soto hit a moonshot 413 feet to right field, but 5 games earlier against Garrett Cole in Game 1, he smacked a fastball even further to left center field and onto the train tracks in Minute Maid Park. Seeing a 21-year-old Juan Soto hit a ball 400 plus feet to two almost opposite sides of the field was so awesome to see, and it seems like he might have lost a little bit of his ability to go to center field and oppo. Not that he doesn't have the physical power to do it, but something in his swing must have changed. To give a visual, here are Soto's spray charts for his last 4 seasons. Spray charts just show each type of hit and what area of the field a player hit it to, and you could see that he was actually hitting opposite field home runs more than pulled home runs in both 2020 and 2021. But that doesn't really seem to be the case in recent seasons. You could see he obviously still has the power to do it, but it's not as consistent of an outcome anymore. I don't think this is something that Soto can't reclaim in his offensive abilities, and I assume it's also something he wants to get back to. I also think it's something that's much more viable than being able to fix his ground ball rate, but we'll just have to wait and see. So what should we expect from Soto for the future? It shouldn't be a shock to people that walking this often and giving your team an opportunity to score you is a very good thing. Soto wouldn't be walking so much without his elite plate discipline, but he also wouldn't be walking as much if it weren't for the fear that pitchers have of what he can do. I think the biggest concern people have is that we saw so much from Soto so quickly that once he regressed just a little bit, it disappointed people. Because for his whole career before 2022, he was basically on a continuous upward trajectory. It seemed like he was going to get even better and better because that was all we had seen so far. It's easily possible that Soto can return to what he did in 2020 and 2021, and it's also possible Soto is closer to what he's been in his other years. Right now, we don't get to know. If you're up to date with the baseball world in the offseason, there have of course been a lot of talks of Soto getting traded. Soto hits free agency after the 2024 season, so whoever trades for him now will likely offer him a big extension too. But then again, there are also reports Soto will test free agency no matter what happens. The Padres apparently need to cut costs, Soto is one of the only guys they don't have locked up, and they'll need to pay him a lot. So I wrote the script for this video about a month ago when the Juan Soto trade talks were barely off the ground. I truly didn't think so much would happen in the time I was making this, but here we are. As many of you might know, Soto is now a Yankee and in the American League for the first time in his career. Just a message for the Yankees, the Yankee fans, or anybody making mock lineups with Soto in it. From a Juan Soto aficionado, he does not like to hit second in the order. I feel like I've seen a lot of mock lineups with him hitting second, so I thought I'd put that out there. Obviously, Soto's not going to complain or make a big deal about hitting second, but I think the numbers do speak for themselves here. I think third in the Yankees order will suit him the best. And also, please appreciate this generational talent. Honestly, I didn't really care where Soto went when the rumors started because I'm riding with Soto no matter where he goes. Is it impacted by the fact that I've drafted him in fantasy baseball as my first pick every year? Possibly, but I honestly don't care what team he goes to. I just hope he keeps raking and keeps walking for the foreseeable future. And I do believe he can get back to where he was in 2021, but what he's doing right now isn't too bad either. Thanks for watching.